Welcome to the World Builders Anvil, episode 295. Let's build the Mystratos, the race, because we'll have another one like this, but it'll be culture, and it's all the same thing.
Stop confusing them.
Let's build. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now, it's time to heat up the forge.
Break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the muck of Java and build. Welcome back. Sowing the seeds of confusion as always. My name is Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And sowing the seeds of dissension as always. I am Michael Miller.
I was thinking despair, but dissension's pretty good.
No, dissension. Always the seeds of dissension.
Yes. So today we're going to talk a bit about the Mystratos race because Michael was really excited. Last episode we talked about building a city, and I think maybe it's fair we get a bit more into it. I have some preconceived notions of them, and we'll talk a bit about that in a second.
Well, I think that you're saying that wrong. I think that you have some conceived notions of them.
Well, I consider
are they really preconceived if you're the one conceiving them?
Yeah.
Wouldn't they be conceived notions?
Technically, if I've said that they're done, but I don't think they're done. I haven't really. I thought there's bits and pieces of them that are done, but not really. So they're both conceived and preconceived.
I think they're ill-conceived.
And post-conceived. Definitely ill-conceived.
All right, so what are we starting with today?
So let's talk a little bit about elves, and it's obvious why they're there, right? I mean,
like Keebler elves, like what people think about when they hear the word.
Every anime has elves.
Well, not every anime.
Every anime, even ones that don't have elves.
There's plenty of animes that do not have elves.
All of them do.
It's not
they
true.
Just don't always have them on screen. And
I don't think that's true either.
Yes, no, they always have them. They're not necessarily always on screen. Yes, that's true. And we'll talk a little bit about the evolution of elves in my world. There are like pretty much four main groups in my world of elves. The Mystratos are kind of they are the foundational elven race.
So are they like the first elven? You say elfin. I would say elven or elfish.
Is that
just a style choice, or am I saying
probably elven is elvish? I think typically in is used instead of ish, but I don't think it really. I think it's a style choice. I don't think it really matters.
All right, fair enough. I just like it when you correct me, and I think I might have been wrong in there. You know what? Actually, do you know where I take it from? Magic cards.
You call it elvish?
Well, they say elvish and elven a lot.
Yes,
like it's usually elfish, I think, on magic cards.
I mean, you could also just say it's elf. You don't even need the en. I mean, there are many ways to do it. I would say there's some internal inconsistencies in their cards if they have elven and elvish. I would be very offended. But they are the progenitor. They are the progenitor elves.
Well, the game takes place in different planes, so it might be elvish in one plane and elven in another.
Well, that's just copying out.
No,
yeah.
The nature of the game is all.
No, it's just there's built-in inconsistencies
different planets, different.
Yeah.
That's how the game. That's. Whatever. I'm not going to argue
that's how they.
Because you're wrong. You don't play it anyway.
CYA.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's a good idea.
Yes, I think that is too. Not okay.
All right. So
essentially, a lot of them come to me from Token.
Token or Tolkien?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's how they come to me, as in most people. D&D, same elves, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have a few different branches of elves, and I was always kind of obsessed with the high elf notion. You have this people who are a little bit lanky, a little bit taller than humans, better looking, more intelligent, have magical innate, but somehow always lose.
And do they always lose?
Pretty much. Name a world that the elves dominate, like maybe Elf World. But besides that, I mean, they always lose.
Well, did they lose in Middle Earth? I mean, I didn't think they were quite losing there.
Well, they helped the humans win, but then they all were exiting stage left because they couldn't handle the pressure.
Well, I thought that was just by choice. They were like, all right, this sucks. Let's move on.
Yeah, that's what most people do when they're forced to migrate. They go, oh, yeah, we want to go.
All right, fair enough.
I mean, they were doing it because the world changed and they didn't fit in anymore. In general, though, my idea, elves kind of go back, I think, they come to us through the Norse, and the elves in the Norse, which some people think are their actual interactions with Native Americans, which might or might not be true.
Is that true? Like where the concept of what we think of as
I've heard that rumor. And if you look at elves from Norse mythology, they're a woodland-based fairy. They're aggressive, which most Americans were, especially when you would meet Norse. I mean, they might not be aggressive the first time they meet, but
Well, and they would have been on the western side of the country, and a lot of the western tribes are a little more aggressive.
Eastern,
no, western. I thought they came from north of Atlantic, north of Alaska. I came across the land bridge.
Oh, they did, but when the Norse were meeting them, it was on the East Coast. So,
well, then I'm full.
Newfoundland, which apparently there was a settlement for quite some time, for several hundred years. Until it kind of died off. But they think the stories of their interactions with these people who had these hit and run tactics in the forest were kind of the thing that led to the idea of elves. I don't know if that's true, because I would say there's probably lots of tribal cultures who lived in woodlands, and most of them would probably have hit and run tactics. And so it's probably not, I don't know how many of those stories leaked all the way back to Scandinavia proper. It could be, I don't know. But I personally don't subscribe to that, and I don't know if there's actually a real scholarly basis to that, or if that's just something I read on the Webernet. But so the idea is you have this race though that's really like beautiful, magical, tall, unaging, essentially everything humans wish they were but aren't. But they never seem to dominate, which is true. Really my major problem, when most D&D worlds, the elves are so much more powerful than everything else. They should just like conquer the whole world, but they don't. They never do. Except for the drow who try and somehow fail. I don't know how that happens. Forgotten Realms. Come on.
Well, I mean, could it simply be the weird concept of like, okay, they live for thousands of years, so their adolescence takes a long time.
Well, that's kind of my interpretation of it.
Well, I haven't even finished.
I've never gotten that from any of my previous readings. Just all elves seem to be kind of, that 18 to 30-year-old look.
Well, right, but here's my thought though. Because an elf lives for so long, generically we're talking 300 to 1,000 years, right?
Yep. In my world, yep.
So, well, in a lot of them, so not just your world. But what I'm saying is because it takes so long for one to grow up, that everything about their society and the growth of is slower. Whereas orcs generally live like what, 20, 30 years? So they're pumping out more of them faster.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
And
so it could simply be a population growth thing.
That's definitely kind of my interpretation of it, is physically they kind of work that way. They stop aging, or they age very, very slowly. So you don't see old elves. Most of the elves you see are, between 200 and 800 years old, and they just kind of all look the same age-wise. So they're unaging in appearance, even though internally they're starting, they start to break down. And that's kind of my interpretation. I've not really seen that like officially stated anywhere though. So I think it's just one of those things where it's just like they're elves and they live a long time, and they all are pretty and look like they're a CW princess, but they're not. Even the men. So, but that's kind of my interpretation. But that explains it to a point. But still, if you're in that mature phase, unless you learn really, really slow, you still have hundreds of years, as an adult, with an adult brain to learn stuff. And so one of my things is, because they live longer, they have a lot of complications built in that aren't needed. But they do on purpose because they actually want to hold the shorter living races out.
What do you mean by complications?
So their language is very complicated, much more complicated than other languages.
Okay.
Their number system,
is that a benefit?
They think so, because their belief is, even though it's longer and tougher for them to learn and do the stuff, shorter lived races can't take advantage of their learning, because it's impossible for them to interpret the elven stuff. They would die before they could figure it out, essentially. That's kind of the hope. Or if they figure it out, it's at the very end and it's too late to do anything about it. So
is that just simply a benefit of secrecy?
It's a style of coding. They just they complicate stuff because they can. They have the time to take the time. They don't feel in a rush because they live longer. So they don't have, there's certain things you have to worry about, like the food and getting through the year, but they don't worry about weeks. They don't worry about weekends. They don't really worry about days. They worry about seasons and years. Their time scope on the short end is not existent, and then looks very, very deeply going further out, which kind of part of the inspiration is the Mesoamerican calendar, which, the Mayan calendar always intrigued me with its essentially epics, which, I don't remember the breakdown, but there's like certain periods of time, which I'm calling the epic, which is probably wrong.
Are you talking about the big circular for that one?
Well, that's the actual, that would be one of those cycles.
Okay.
So it's like they have a bunch of cycles that repeat over and over again. And I believe the scientists have actually located it to a very complicated astronomical time scale, where there's something that they shouldn't be able to see with the naked eye, that they figure it out by watching the motion of the stars to get the time frame down. But and I want to say it's like 8,000 years. It's a ridiculously long time. And I know the last one ended in 2012, which is why people were like, oh, the Mayans say the world's going to end. That's actually probably not true. More than likely, it was that's when the last person made a calendar going forward. They looked ahead a lot, but that's probably as far forward as anyone got to making. They're carving the stone. They take a while.
The two things that I heard was, one, that was what you're saying. It was like the last calendar that they had up to. But I also heard that they didn't say that the world was going to end, but just that a cycle was ending, which also implies that a new cycle begins.
So my idea is the calendar is going to be very important to them, but that's more of a cultural thing. Today, I want to get more into some of the stereotypes people have. Elves are always the good guys, and that's not quite true. That's definitely not true. But for the most part, in most generic fantasy, elves are a good race. And in my world, they're not necessarily evil. But if you're their enemy on the battlefield, you probably don't think they're good guys. They do partake in human sacrifice, but there are reasons why they do that. So,
and again, I want to clarify. Sentient sacrifice.
Sentient sacrifice.
So that means that they won't necessarily kill an elf or specifically a human. They might.
Yeah.
But, an upper, higher thinking being.
Yes. And they definitely are big into blood sacrifices, more so than necessarily even sacrificing people. But that'll come in a little bit more in the next episode. For this episode, I want to talk about a little bit about, first their appearance. And there's certain things I know here. I know they're taller than humans. I know they're like a lean muscle, no bulk to them, but not weak, just no bulk. And I remember there's a guy in the service who was like this. He wrestled in high school, and one of the strongest people I've ever interacted with. And I'm a fairly strong person.
Yeah, you are a strong person.
And he was every bit as strong as I was. But if you looked at him, he looked about a fifth of my size.
Yeah.
And you would have thought he was one of these 98-pound weaklings, but he was one of the strongest people I've ever met. It was all lean muscle. Obviously, he was much better at running than I was, or distance running.
Really? You were better at sprinting?
Oh, yes.
I would have thought with your legs that you would have been better at distance.
No, because lack of endurance.
Yeah.
More muscle, less endurance.
That's fair. That's fair. Now, do you consider the Mystratos a type of elf that might have animalistic characteristics physically? Like, do they have horns? Do they have fangs? Are their legs shaped the way a human leg is, or is it reversed like an animal leg, like a deer leg?
Nope, they are all humanoid in appearance.
Okay.
So the biggest
how many fingers?
5 fingers.
5 fingers.
5 fingers. They do have the bigger ears and like anime style ears. My
real long.
The real long,
like ears. World of Warcraft style ears.
World of Warcraft style ears. And I kind of wanted, all my elves don't have ears like that because some have more of the token ears.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, token or Tolkien?
Yes. Okay. And I don't know how many times that joke has been.
That joke is still funny to me. I don't know why. It's been how many years, and I still laugh at it.
But these elves have bigger ears. They live. The environment they live in is key to understanding their development.
A quick aside: you should make a race of elves, and I say this in air quotes, that look like Romulans. Just big round ears with messed up teeth. They should actually be Romulans.
That's not Romulans. Romulans look kind of like elves. You mean
Ferengi?
Ferengi, yes.
Ferengi, yeah, that look like Ferengi.
They have a different kind of ears, yeah.
They're like, these are elves, right? Yeah, we're elves.
And kind of my visualization was I wanted sort of the tall, high elf from Lord of the Rings, but I wanted it to look more like an anime elf.
Okay.
Because one, I had way too many friends who had way too much love for fantasy and anime, which nothing against it. There's some good stuff and there's some bad stuff.
Why are you adopting it then? If you don't see,
I like the way it looks.
Okay.
I like the way it looks, and I wanted something that looked a little different that kind of met that, because those are typically the most goody two shoe of elves, you know. And it's just the kind
as opposed to like the Keebler elves. You don't think they're goody two shoe?
No, they make the stuff to get people fat. They are more like drow. They just have a different attack.
Oh, I see. So they're actually evil and disguised as friendly.
That's right.
Okay. There's really only 3 jobs for an elf. Making cookies in a tree, making shoes for the lazy cobbler, and the big show, working in Santa's workshop, making toys.
That's from Elf, I believe.
That's from the movie Elf.
Yeah.
Big fan. Sarah and I watch that movie every single year.
I didn't see it when it first came out, but I saw it several years ago still, because it's been
it is one of the best Christmas movies. It really is. And honestly,
it's become a household tradition for me. Once I did see it, I never stopped, because
you know what's amazing? And he gets me every time. His earnest, like, expressions of joy and like he's discovering something new.
You believed it. Yeah.
You believe it. And you believe it every time. You're like, there's a camera crew around him. There's a bunch of people, and he's
a great liar.
He is so in that character. He is so in that character that he sells it every time I watch it. I get sucked in every time.
Well, they recorded it, so it was believable the time they recorded it. It should be with the same level believable every time. But I know you're saying it's
well, no, but like you know some things.
Christmas rotation. I want to see that one during Christmas every year now.
You know, there's some movies that you watch it over and over again, and you start picking it apart, and you start catching things, and you start seeing things a little differently, and you're like, oh, I see. I'm starting to see how how the donuts are made here. Like I see.
And the beautiful thing with that movie is it has those moments, but the movie's all about him as the elf. And him as the elf does not have any of those moments.
No.
And he is the glue of the movie. He's the backbone of the movie. So go watch Elf.
Such a good movie.
Okay. Now, the elves of my world do have natural affinity to magic, and some of it's lost. That's key. And I think we've talked about this in Bedrachum and Syrian cultures about pools of water. And
are Syrian and Elfin culture?
They're influenced, and we'll talk a bit about that.
Okay.
We'll talk a bit about that.
Well, I mean physically.
No, they're
no. Okay, they're human. All right, that's all I was shooting for.
And now the thing to keep in mind is with this culture here specifically. Let me open this up so I have some idea of how much time I'm blabbering on. Oh, good God. Now,
how far along are we?
Almost at 30 minutes. Yeah.
You could probably cut about 4 minutes, though.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. We usually cut at least 4. But now, the thing is with the elves here they have this thing called water magic. And so essentially they could transport themselves over vast distances from pool to pool. They just needed to know the locations of the pool. And you could find through trial and error.
Does that mean they would have need to have been to the other pool physically first to travel back to one they're already aware of?
You can risk it. And most of the great pools were found because they follow ley lines. So there's magic that sort of travels between the pools. Those are what people consider ley lines because that's kind of as magic travels as sort of like a circulatory system for the world. And
I would have called it magical bus routes.
At areas with a lot of magic, there are these pools. The elves could literally put a bunch of people in the pools and then just have them appear at the other side.
Mm-hmm. Do they have to dunk themselves under and then come up in the other?
Nope.
No? Oh, see, I like the idea of like dipping down in and then coming back up. They literally just like teleport.
No, they just kind of appear out of the mist of the pond, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just like all of a sudden you're looking there and your eyes will play a trick on you because your brain will try and fill it in, but it'll look like they just kind of fade in and all of a sudden there's now like hundreds of these elves around you. And now remember, these are a warlike elven race.
They are a warlike.
Oh, yes. I mean, think about it, they're very much based on a Mesoamerican, like,
oh yeah, big time warriors
tribe. So essentially, they started colonizing through the pools. So instead of spreading out the way you would do it as a normal race,
from a central point.
Their central point was through pools, and so they had at the city of Mystere. This part called what's now called the Evermoan Forest. In modern day Kingdom of Bedrachus or Kingdom of
Grabatus.
Bedrachus. Grabatus would be the more modern name.
Are you impressed? I remember that.
I'm impressed. Then also in another, and they also typically like to stay in forest because they can do what's called brachiating. They found other pools, but they would colonize in forest because they can brachiate. That's one of the racial skills. And when I say that, that means about 90% of the race can do it proficiently. There's like 5% who's like superstars at it. They're like Legolas, and they could skate through the branches, and you would think that they're like just like ice skating.
So what is brachiating? What is brachiating? Tell me what this is.
Brachiating is like the ability to move through trees. So like monkeys are brachiators.
I was going to say the word sounded very familiar, but I could not quite identify it.
So my elves can also brachiate. They typically like forest, especially some of these forests with large trees, because they don't always have to use their arms. So their arms can be open to use bows, but they can move very nimbly through forest.
Does that mean their feet are like apes' feet?
Nope.
Oh, I was so excited there for a second. Come on, give them ape feet.
No.
Give them ape hands for feet.
Nope. Nope.
Give them crab claws for feet.
Nope.
All right, I was just shooting from the hip on that one.
You can always shoot from the hip on that one. No, remember, they are the height of what humans would consider beautiful. Now, all races don't consider them beautiful, but they are.
Give them tentacles for feet.
Oh, there are like
water. Come on,
there are
right in.
They have 82 tentacles, but they're not in the feet.
They have. Did you say 82 tentacles?
82 tentacles, but they're not in the feet.
I'm afraid to ask where, especially since you were.
No, I'm just making that one.
Well, I know. I was going to say, especially if you're adopting an anime style look.
Well, that was kind of the thing going through my brain.
Sure, okay, I was going to say.
that was the sick joke inside of my head. So once again, that kind of goes to the lean muscle, right? They have to be strong, but the more bulk they have, the harder it is to brachiate. So they're a little bit longer. They have no tails. I considered a tail. I did consider a tail, but
what kind of tail were you considering?
More like a monkey, like prehensile kind of tail. But I decided it goes against the look, and the look, the form is more important than the real function here, because they're high elves, right? They are the perfection of elves. Now, due to some instability in magic, we'll blame magic for this, right?
Okay.
Something happened which caused them to lose access to these water highways.
So
which
they
is
still can
hard.
access the pools physically. They just can't travel between them.
They just can't travel between them. So at that point, that's how the different elven races started, because you had elves in a couple different areas that were cut off from the central empire.
Mystere.
Of Mystere, yes. And they start going their own routes.
Did you decide, since the Central Empire, that makes me think Emperor. So is it an Emperor? Is there one elf in charge?
Of Mystere, yes.
Okay.
And now
we don't have to break into that just yet. I just wanted to.
We won't go too much into that, but I'll also say sometimes it's not quite as true as other times. There are periods of times where it's very turbulent, and the Emperor is always there as a constant, but doesn't always necessarily control as much of the lands as the Emperor would like to think he does. But
well, my point is that it's not it's not like a council or something.
No, there's no. Yeah, it's an absolute power, and there's a price to pay, and we'll get into that because I do know about that, but that's more of a culture thing. But just big, long, beautiful people with big ears, big hair, and here's a cool thing, right?
And 82 tentacles.
The area they live in is boundaried on one side by Andes style mountains. So tall, sharp, jagged, hard to traverse mountains.
How do they do it? How do they do it climbing? How do they do it climbing rocks, since they're so good with trees? I wonder.
Oh, you can traverse it. It's not easy. It's just hard mountains to climb. They can be traversed, but like trying to even move an army through there would be difficult. And remember, they're good with moving across plants. It's different climbing rocks. So they can do it. It's just, once again, it's just not their specialty. But the point being, you have tall, jagged mountains, which means all of the water, from the rain that comes off the ocean scrapes against the mountains and falls. So one side of the mountains is a Sahara-style desert. On this side is like an
Shangri-La.
Well, it's an Amazon rainforest. So low down, but because of the tall mountains, there are parts that aren't as rainforesty. They're a little bit more temperate going up the mountains. More temperate, but not super temperate. But so like if you're at the capital city, it's much cooler in the lowlands where you have lots of rivers and marshes and giant trees it's very harsh terrain. The lower you get, because all the water comes down, floods off the mountains, and then makes its way back to the ocean via a river, obviously. Massive river system, lots of water, lots of rainfall a year gets peeled off and pushed out into the ocean. So it makes the one side very dry and a totally different area than this side of the mountains, just because the mountains are so tall. Rain can't get over it, essentially.
Yay, rain and blocking rain wall of mountains.
Yeah. Tall mountains. So the mountains do have an effect on them, though.
Well, of course they would. I mean, that's such a huge thing that it'd be impossible to ignore. I would imagine it would be like a cultural touchstone just to be living next to such a thing.
Yeah. Well, and one of the volcanoes is where they believe Mystere to have been murdered. And volcanoes aren't super common on Gardul, but there's a big one not too far from their capital. Actually, if you're in that center part of the city, you look due north, you'll see a volcano. Not due north, due west. I'm sorry, due east. I apologize again. I believe due east from the city. And it's lined up perfectly from heaven to the Emperor's Palace. If you follow that line straight out, you'll see a big volcano further off in the distance. That's where they believe Mystere's body was essentially dumped after it was murdered by her children. But because volcanoes, when they spew out volcanic, besides creating glass, which is very important to the culture, it creates very fertile ground, which makes it really easy to grow grain on.
I didn't know that.
So which is why so many people live around volcanoes. You hear about these tragedies all the time of a volcano going off, and like Pompeii and Herculaneum, you're like, why would you build your city there? Because it has really good dirt.
Fair enough.
And
I would have thought just the opposite. I would have thought the heat and the sulfur would have like ruined the land around it.
Well, it does when it comes out, and then when it's gone, it's very fertile.
But my thought process would be, not knowing the science of it, that it would have messed it up for a while. But apparently, I'm way off.
Yeah, I don't know how long it would stay after, like how long it would take for like Pompeii to become good again. I'd imagine relatively quickly, because it's great dirt. So you start getting seeds. It would probably take a few years for the seeds to get redispersed if it happens naturally. But it's just a really fertile. Now, in areas like in Hawaii, where you have a pretty consistent eruption, you probably don't have enough time to have plants really catch back on in the areas that get hit a lot by.
But look at the rest of the islands.
But look at the rest of the islands.
That's right. It's all from that volcano. So
it's one of the interesting things. I remember I was watching a great courses about Hawaii, and they're like, it's one of the interesting things. It's the only culture that they found on Earth that got to the level they would call a civilization, but had no urban backbone, but had enough population over the islands that it could support, where it started getting around the time they met Westerners, unfortunately for them, started to get sophisticated enough that we would have considered them a civilization, even though they didn't have the urbanized trappings that we typically consider along with it, but was just how fertile the islands were for producing life. Plus volcanic islands, on the other hand, also, because of the nature of where they are, typically they're currents that push sediment up, which makes like sea life very rich around them as well too. So interesting things, islands. But yeah, so there's I don't know if you have any ideas that you think I should go appearance wise for the elves, but I kind of like my idea there.
Well, it sounds like you have a pretty solid idea with what you want for them, which is
so make them better if you can. You know what I'm saying? I think you can. Yeah.
You don't think I can? I'm always a big fan of some sort of distinguishing feature, especially if we're talking about something that is relatively as air quotes here, generic as elves. Elves are in so many different worlds. When you say elf, we all have an idea that comes to mind, and yours sounds very similar to falling in line with that idea, which kind of surprises me, because a lot of times,
remember, I like things to look and to have a feeling, but it's like
look familiar, but
the closer you get, the more you're like, wait, there's something.
Yeah.
Did they just sacrifice a baby?
Have we done a deep dive on your goblins yet?
No.
Oh my God, we have to do that. I love your goblins. Oh, folks, just wait. We're going to do it. I'm going to press Jeff into it. His goblin.
In my world, they're actually a race. They're not just.
They're terrifying. They're terrifying. Oh, they're awesome. I mean, I love them. They're terrifying. So, okay. So look wise, you pretty much have it down. you really could take physically this elf and drop them into many different worlds, and we'd say, oh, an elf, I know what that is. Yes. So all your defining characteristics are going to come from culture and society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, then I don't think I really have anything else to add there.
Mm-hmm. So the next episode, we'll be doing a deep dive into the culture.
Well,
Trait-wise, there are some important
traits. All right. I was going to say you still have a couple notes here. Okay.
We have a couple traits, and one is unaging. That's a sort of a generic thing, and it's not that mine don't. It's that the aging process takes a lot.
Physical aging process.
They deteriorate very quickly. They get to like 900 and then they start to get old. But at that point, they're kind of isolated. So non-elves would probably never see an old elf. And the young ones are also isolated to protect them from outsiders. So you probably wouldn't see like if you were a human diplomat going to visit the emperor, you would not meet the emperor's children until they're adult age.
How quickly?
So it gives the illusion that they're all CW princesses.
Always adults, yeah.
Yeah.
How do they age mentally? Does it take them 30 years to be like a 30-year-old human, or does it take them 200, 300, 400 years to be comparable to a 30-year-old human?
I think it takes them about 30 years to become 30-year-old human.
And then they just kind of sit there for a long time.
With that 20 to 30 year age until they're like 800, and then they start to decline.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely not unheard of, even to go beyond 1,000 years for like very few elves, but it's not impossible.
Well, just like there's exceptional humans, there'd be exceptional elves.
Of course. Mm-hmm. Now, they have, but typically the weak amongst them, they hide it the best they can. Okay, they're just elves. Yeah, right. It's never they're just elves, sir. Magic cards now. I think they're magic cards. They could be Pokemon cards for all I know.
Bite your tongue, sir.
They do have magic inherent, which to me creates a necessary problem.
How so?
How do they not just wipe the earth over?
Well, I mean, limitations.
Realistic. Right? We'll get to that, but I think their magic is very much connected to the rainforest. I think that's the reason why they stick in forest so much. Is it's something about the trees that feed them. It's like they, instead of having moon magic, they have wood magic.
Mm-hmm.
So something about nature. That makes them work. And so that's great, even though you could probably call it a limitation, but you don't want to screw with them in the forest. I know my elves have camouflage that's limited to woodland areas.
I occasionally have wood magic myself, and you don't want to screw with me in the woods.
Yeah. Okay. I'll let that one go. Now, the elves, I know they actually have camouflage in woodland areas.
Now, does that mean super predatory, bending light camouflage, or just they really blend into the natural surroundings?
And part of it's the anime hair, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the purple hair, you have purple flowers and stuff in the jungle. There's lots of different colors in a rainforest.
Mm.
So you have lots of a wide varieties of hair colors because it blends in. They blend in. It's not like light bending. It's just that if you were to scan across the forest, the skin tones, the hair things typically fit in to their surroundings.
Mm. It's like one of those deals where if they're standing still, you'll not see them.
Yeah, exactly.
Like if you've ever watched the end of Harry and the Hendersons, I love that bit.
I don't remember.
Oh, he's walking away into the forest, and it's just you just see him walking away into the forest, and you're like, oh no, here he's going away.
Mm-hmm.
And then as he's walking away, you see 4 more Bigfoot creatures.
They're all right there.
They're all right there, but they were there the whole time and they're all perfectly still. Mm-hmm. So when they all one by one decide to move, you're like, oh my God, they're everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. And that's kind of the elves, right? And so when you're in especially their turf, you don't know if they're there. There's one that could be up in the trees, they could be down below. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't know. You probably wouldn't see them if they're trying to hide, even in the day, because the types of forests they like too are canopied. They're big old growth forests that are canopied. So there's not a lot of light. Plus they blend in, makes them very, very formidable. So like, that's why once their water magic disappears, they lose the ability, and we'll have to. I don't know why. We'll have to make that up when we build the culture. I just know that I need
the reason for the water magic vanishing. That's what we need a reason for.
Yeah, because it's really culturally important. They don't recognize it as happening, the Mystratos so much, but really, because that's what creates different types of elves in my world.
I have one idea, something to consider.
Well, that's for next episode.
Well, just something, because if I don't remember, okay. blame it on the Siren. Maybe the Siren see them as a threat, and they decide to cut that off early, so they won't have to deal with them later.
Well, we'll talk about that. There's definitely a connection with the Siren.
You like that idea?
Yep. It could be related to that. Yes.
Okay. Cool.
Now, limitation wise, they're very patient.
Well, that sounds like an advantage.
It is, but they're not in a rush. The problem is, let's say you have the Mystratos Empire. They have a plan in 30 years to invade this little civilization, on the coast next to them, right? Mm-hmm. In that 30 years, you have a relatively small power called Shiftar to the north that starts to grow and expand everywhere. And by the time their invasion starts, Shiftar has moved into the area, and now you're starting a war with a major empire because you took too long. It's to the point of being unbending. So they get very rigid in their thought processes, which sometimes cost them either the chance to do something, or later on it ends up really working against them, because especially the human empire is just, and another group which kind of bring their civilization to an end. Just they're much more adaptive, they're much more quick thinking. And the other problem is genetics. When they breed with humans, elves tend to disappear. So
I would have thought the opposite.
Elves come in, and it's a genetic thing with humans in my world, right? And let's say the humans invade. Unfortunately, this is olden days. There's like lots of raping and stuff. All of those children are half elves. If they had children with other elves, they're half elves. If they have children with the other elves, they're half elves. It's like they can't get the human out.
What if a half elf has an offspring with a human? Would it just be human?
It becomes human.
Interesting.
And that's why there are only half elves. But and that was kind of me answering the question is, why are there only half elves? There's like no 3/4 elves or quarter elves. There's just half elves. And for mine it's like one time they get cut in half. The next time it's just they're human. And there might be a recessive thing that comes up here there, but genetically,
maybe a little ear thing, maybe an affinity for water.
Yeah, maybe a little bigger than normal ears, big ears. Yeah. Poor kid. Rough school as a human. But yeah. So they definitely have some traits there. And for me, because of their patience, they're always a little bit behind the technology of the younger races, which seems backwards, right? But the thing is, they're not in a rush.
I mean, they're not in a rush. Yeah, that's what I was about to say. If they know they've got the time, then they're we'll get around to learning how to use the new iPhone
stuff. But you know what? We're finishing up a lot of these stone weapons. We'll finish this up before we start worrying about bronze.
Yeah, we really feel like we've got these great stone weapons. We're coming into their own.
They're becoming very beautiful, very intricate, much better than any stone weapons you guys have ever made, which is true. But the problem is, by the time they make the first bronze weapon, oh, guess what?
We have steel.
Iron. So, it's like you're always behind the 8 ball, which once again, with the younger races around them who want to gobble up their land, the biggest strength that they have is probably the land itself is very tough for people to navigate. It's like I says, like think of an Amazon rainforest, with areas of plateau that come above it, but you have to get to those through a giant rainforest and a very nasty, thick rainforest. Nothing simple. Okay. Well, I mean, my thing is, this is pretty much the race, right? So, if you ever listen to my race episodes, I don't put a lot of understanding the traits of the race, understanding what they're strong at, where they live, are important in forming how their culture will end up, probably, but it does not make the culture itself. And this is one of the few cultures that I have that's pretty monolithic in its rate. It's very much, there aren't humans who consider themselves Mystratos culture. So I have a few cultures that are monolithic racially, but not many.
What do you mean by monolithic?
So most cultures are mixed races. So there might be some dwarves, there might be some orcs or whatever. There might be some.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Culture versus race. Gotcha.
Yeah. But this is one of those that is pretty much monolithic. If you're a Mystratos, you're an elf. That's what it is. And people have a respect and a fear and maybe a bit of a lust, and not just because you're pretty, but a lust for your stuff. So, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the culture though. So, now for the world building test, do you want to do yours as a real world or world building? I'm
not sure. It kind of could fall into either. So you tell me and we'll assign it and then you pick the other one, whichever it is.
Okay.
It's a real world or a world building task, Jeff will tell you in a second, is go watch Record of Lodos War. That's a good one. Don't you think?
I enjoyed it up until the end.
Well, I agree with that. The end is not awesome, but
it was a very good sort of epic fantasy journey, high magic, I would say.
Yeah.
Epic fantasy journey. Don't watch the last episode. It ruins it.
No, watch the last episode.
And then ignore it.
Your points about the last episode, if I remember correctly, and I don't think I would have picked up on this because the first time I watched Record of Lodos War, I was much younger.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm remembering correctly, your problem with it was the characters didn't show advancement.
They actually seemed to undo all of the advancement. It's like there was it's one of the better anime up to that point because there's like a lot of good character development and the things that are happening seem to affect the people in the story. And then you get to the end and they just seem to undo all of that. But yes.
So go watch Record of Lodos War. And what is that? What task is that?
We will make that the real world task.
All right. So what's the world building task?
The world building task is to create an elven culture and then invade it.
Invade the elven culture with a different culture?
Yeah. Because you have to realize that no matter how cool they are, no matter how superior, they'll always lose. Ultimately, they'll decide to leave or the orcs will take them over or something. The humans will save them, and then they pretty much work for the humans, I guess. So, I mean, they always lose ultimately in the end. They're not cool like orcs. So
or goblins.
So enjoy your episode, and we'll see you all next week.
Oh, wait. One more thing. If you're going to get Record of Lodos War, go to www.garduel.com/Amazon. You can get it on Amazon. If you go through our portal, it helps out the show.
Yes, we would appreciate that. Everyone, have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.garduel.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.